Hey everyone, I'm Jared Hatch, and today on Crafting Men, we're going to see what we can learn from rats and mice. This is for all you that think that men are nothing but no good, dirty, rotten rats. But first, be sure to like the video and subscribe to my channel so you don't miss any of the upcoming episodes. If you've ever read the book or watched the cartoons, The Rats of Nim, they were actually based on real experiments. If you don't know what I'm talking about, highly recommend the books. I'm not sponsored, I just really enjoyed reading them. For those of you that do know what I'm talking about, sadly, no, the experiment was not about supersizing the intelligence of the rodents. Instead, there were a series of experiments about overpopulation with rodents. There was a man by the name of John Calhoun that believed that overpopulation was one of the most critical dangers of the modern society. In the 40s and 50s, he began running a set of experiments with rats. Started in his backyard, he moved it to barns and all over the place, running the same concept of the test over and over again, seeing what the rodents would do in a scenario where the key limitation was space. His experiments earned him a PhD and the awareness of the National Health Institute, where he was taken on and continued to run a series, but with mice, throughout the 60s and 70s. Dr. Calhoun's most famous experiment was Universe 25. He set up a pen indoors that was 9 by 4.5 feet so that he could control everything down to the climate. He ensured that there were sufficient resources for food, water, and nest making in order to support as large of the population as would grow within this mouse utopia, as he called it. He began the experiment with 8 mice, 4 female, 4 male. At first, things were hectic. These were young mice recently having reached the age of adolescence where they could have children. About 100 days or so, they were stressed and manically exploring their new living space. But then, as they settled down and started to establish community, they rapidly established the community. They were able to double the population about every 55 days. Dr. Calhoun and his team, however, noticed a change on day 315. Birth rates had dropped, and going forward, it would take them up to 140 days to be able to double the population. Along with these changes, he began to notice the behavioral and the social changes of the mice. They would expel the youth before they had finished weaning. Parents would wound the children. The males that were dominant were unable to defend their territory as the population increased. The females became more aggressive, and the males that were not dominant began to just ignore the dominant males in larger society, and instead they would just hang out with each other. But interestingly enough, they became violent with each other. He continues, after day 600, the social breakdown continued and the population declined toward extinction. During this period, females ceased to reproduce. Their male counterparts withdrew completely, never engaging in courtship or fighting. They ate, drank, slept, and groomed themselves, all solitary pursuits. Sleek, healthy coats and absence of scars characterized these males. They were named the beautiful ones. These beautiful ones had the appearance of the ideal rodent. They should have been optimal mate selections, but their behaviors and their desire for it were lacking. Interestingly enough, he tried to take some of these males and put them into other successful colonies of mice, and their behaviors didn't change. At the end of this experiment, Dr. Calhoun concluded that overpopulation was indeed a threat and a risk that would lead to societal collapse and social breakdown. That's been taken down a peg or two since then, as we've looked at the data and realized that with the peak population of around 2,200 mice, there were still around 1,600 more mice that could have lived within the space. Additionally, the social changes began around that day 315 when the population was actually around 620. Scientists have debated a few different issues around here with isolation or lack of the ability to interact. They've gone over and over on it. But it is interesting, and I think there's some good talking points that we as men can look at coming out of this. For instance, there was another experiment he ran with rats, where he had the ability to house up to 5,000 rats, but the population never exceeded 200. An interesting societal breakdown that he observed there was that the rats began to establish communities, and they had these no-go zones in between each community. With the lack of interaction and the isolation that they put themselves in, they artificially restrained the size of their communities and increased stress and anxiety to the point where they had internal violence, and eventually they distanced themselves and stopped pursuing mating and courtship. While scientists can quibble and debate over whether or not we can agree on the conclusions of this experiment, I think there's a couple interesting takeaways. First and foremost, you'll notice that the requirement of healthy competition and that drive for survival was removed from all of these rodents. That ever needed concept of trial and adversity in order to derive value and purpose was taken away. You can see a lot of similarities with our society and developed nations. We're not hurting on survival anymore. Instead, we're looking at how best to entertain ourselves. It'd be good to make sure that you have purpose and a reason to go through the monotony of the day, and so that way you know why you're doing things. Second of all, with the isolation, especially with the one rat reference that I had there, it's good to interact with people that don't think like you. Expand your community. Don't have to like and agree with everything they say and do, but it's good to make sure that you're aware of other people within your universe, other people that have the ability to interact with you. Worst case scenario, you're going to learn something. Hope you enjoyed the video today. Be sure to like it and hit subscribe, as well as that notification bell so you don't miss any of the upcoming videos. Also, stop by the website at craftingmen.com to check out some of the cool merch we've got. Until next time.